Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The very first votes of the 2024 election have now been cast. There were no big surprises in Iowa last night as Donald Trump did cruise to victory, 51% of the total vote. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis came in a distant second, earning the support of 21% of Republican caucus goers, followed closely by Nikki Haley with 19%. In fact, the ex-president won 98 out of 99 counties in Iowa, all without spending anywhere near as much time in the state as his rivals, or even as much time as he spent in New York courtrooms. Now, of course, the ex-president and his allies are selling this as an enormous victory. They want the story coming out of Iowa to be Donald Trump has once again imposed his will over the Republican Party. He's now cruising to the nomination. He will soon reclaim his throne in Washington. He's inevitable. And it all may feel like a frightening inevitability. And there is, I will say, a lot to be scared about. I don't think I hold back on that score. But I also think last night's results demonstrated that Donald Trump has some huge fundamental weaknesses that are just there staring us in the face. Now, these were the coldest caucuses in Iowa history, which is saying something. People had to brave wind chills as low as negative 30 degrees. They had to trudge through piles of snow and icy roads to get to their precincts. And it is fair to assume that only the most passionate, amped up voters would venture out in that kind of weather. And in the end, of that small group of people willing to do this, go out on a Monday night, barely a majority supported Donald Trump, the man who is supposed to be their unanimous, beloved leader. Just about half of all the Iowa caucus goers actually came out through the wind and the snow and the ice to support someone else. And that lack of enthusiasm is also reflected in the turnout numbers. There were about 115,000 people that turned out last night compared to 186,000 back in 2016. Now, some of that dip was likely due to the weather, but remember, caucuses always take place in the dead of winter. Compare Trump's winning vote total to that of Senator Ted Cruz back in 2016. Trump won with just over 56,000 votes. That's only about 4,500 more than Cruz 8 years ago. So this is the first snapshot we have of the 2024 election, and doesn't fit with the narrative that we hear all the time that Republicans are just crazy for their cult leader Donald Trump across the board, right? I mean, think about this. There are more than 750,000 registered Republicans in the state of Iowa. 115,000 of them showed up to caucus last night. Just 56,250 voted for the ex-president. That's like less than 2% of the population of Iowa. There were more people in the stands for the last Hawkeyes home game than the number that voted for Trump. Then there's the entrance polling out of Iowa last night. A third of the people that showed up in that cold and wind, a third of caucus goers said that they would not consider Donald Trump to be fit for president if he is convicted of a crime. I got to say, that was probably the most interesting result from our entrance polling last night. That number is higher than I would have guessed by quite a bit. And that's a big chunk of voters. And it really emphasizes the enormous risk to the Republican Party if they go ahead and nominate this guy who's been indicted 91 times. He very well may be convicted of more than one crime before the election in November. And if that happens, I think it's fair to say, even if all of those people that said they would consider him unfit aren't going to vote against him, right? It's going to be some smaller sliver. But there's going to be huge political consequences to a conviction. The polling also reminds us that amid the repeated claims that the prosecutions of Trump are political, right, there is a very real difference between being indicted and being found guilty by a jury of your peers. And then finally, I think we need to look at all this information from Iowa in the context of one more detail about the national electorate. So according to the Biden campaign's internal research, this is fascinating. The majority of undecided voters, those are people who don't know who they're going to vote for in the general, nearly 3/4 of them do not believe that Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee. Campaign officials say that is due in large part to the fact that these voters are just not paying attention. Quote, you can't conceive of how tuned out these folks are. Now, that might be hard to imagine if you are a regular viewer of this network. MSNBC viewers hear a lot about the ex-president because we spend a lot of time discussing how he is a singular threat to American democracy. But out in the broader world, Donald Trump is simply not front of mind. He has not been in everyone's face all the time, as he was back in 2016 when he first ran for president. He's not the number one story in every news outlet every day, commanding attention as he was during his years in the White House when he was the president. Donald Trump is an exhausting and unpleasant person to think about. So it's totally understandable and rational. A whole lot of people have been trying not to think about him much over the past few years. But very soon, that's going to become a lot more difficult. Trump is about to once again become the center of mainstream public attention in a way that has not been the case since he tried to overthrow the government 3 years ago. As McKay Coppins explains in a new piece for The Atlantic, for many Americans, the former president has become an abstraction. But watching him speak, as Coppins did at a rally in Mason City, Iowa early this month, is, quote, both instantly familiar and still somehow shocking, like rewatching an old movie you saw 100 times as a kid, but whose most offensive jokes you'd forgotten. To be re-exposed to Donald Trump is to be shocked anew at his sheer depravity and unfitness for any office. And that is exactly what is about to happen to a lot of Americans who've not been reading the absolutely deranged things he says day in, day out on Truth Social, or hearing the disgusting rhetoric he spews on stage at those very rallies. And I can almost hear you groaning from your couch right now at the idea of having to see and hear him again like that day in, day out. And I think there's a lot of people who think the more attention Donald Trump gets, the stronger he gets. I don't think that's true. I think history shows that's not true. The more attention he gets, the more people see him and hear him behaving abominably, the less they like him. Just look at this today. What does he do after Iowa? He shows up at the second defamation trial brought by the woman he had been found liable for sexually abusing, a woman who says he raped her in a dressing room. The day after his win in Iowa, Trump could not help himself from going there to glower and attempt to intimidate this woman, who a jury found was telling the truth, while a second jury now decides how much more money he must pay her for defaming her for calling her a liar when she says that he raped her. So for all the braggadocio about Trump's victory last night, how we should all be very afraid, he has profound weaknesses, and they are not going away.